All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our webinar on effective essay organization. I'm Angela Francis. I'm the Assistant Dean of General Education and First Year Experience. And in a prior life, I taught college writing, both at SPS and at other CUNY colleges. So this is something that I love talking about and something that I used to do quite a lot of. So, just two quick bits of ground rules. If you've been to any webinar that I've given, you will be familiar with these, but just in case, if you have a question, please do put it in the QA. We are a smaller group, so I will check the chat as well, but it is possible that I'll miss something if you put it there. So the QA is still much better to go. But if you do have a technical problem, so you stop being able to hear me, you stop being able to see the screen, please put that in the chat. I am joined by two of my very favorite people from the events team who are going to help me make sure this goes as smoothly as possible. We have a lot to cover, so I am going to go a bit quickly, but I do not want you to worry about taking a bunch of notes. We will be both providing the recording to you, and I will also be providing my slides to you, so you will have all of the information I'm about to cover to review at any point during the semester and beyond. So we will be discussing a writing process that I love as one way of getting into thinking about essay organization. The first thing being breaking down the assignment, developing, a preliminary thesis, researching the topic, refining your thesis and organization, and completing the drafting process. So if we get started with that first step, in terms of understanding the writing assignment, we're going to need to make sure we are perfectly clear about how many words or pages you need to write, the number and type of sources to cite, the type or structure of your argument, your audience. So I know it's tempting to think about this being the professor, but your professor is always a stand-in for a different audience. And this could be someone who is a general layperson, but generally informed, or a skeptical person who knows nothing about it. If you are not clear on who your audience should be, definitely ask your professor. And tied to audience, once you know the audience, what is your purpose? So I'm sure in your mind, because it was definitely my mind, my purpose when I was writing my essays or my papers as a graduate student even was sometimes either just to satisfy the requirements of the course or figure out a thesis. But there's another purpose that you should be going for, and that's often what is in your thesis statement. So this idea of convincing your reader of whatever your main point is. And one way to think about all of this and make sure you are clear about all of it is to annotate not just your readings, but your assignment prompts. So in this case, this was an old essay we used to have as part of orientation. And what you can see here is that I did a combination of things. If you are not someone who's used to annotating, annotating basically means providing yourself with notes in the margins. And so in this case, I'm writing notes about what exactly I need to do. I'm also highlighting things that are important. So the length of the essay, key readings and questions I need to answer. The fact that this says connections cues me into the fact that this is a comparison paper. Um, and then at the bottom in this corner down here, you can see I noted a question I needed to ask the professor. So I am a huge fan of annotating any handout that you receive from your professor, just because this is a great way to make sure you are perfectly clear before you get started. And tied to this, another key thing to do is to check for a grading rubric. So in Blackboard, you can, when there's a rubric, see it either on the assignment submission page or in My Grades. And your rubric that you'll see there is the exact one, generally speaking, that your professor will be using to evaluate your work. So if you look at the rubric before working on your essay, you will be able to see exactly what your professor is looking for and treat that as a checklist. Once you understand the assignment and you're asked any questions you have, it's time to think about your thesis statements. I'm going to cover this just in case anyone here is a little bit rusty or maybe forgot a bit about what your thesis is. I'm going to look at basic thesis statements and how you can consider this for your assignments, as well as how you can strengthen your working thesis. So, what is a thesis? And fair warning, I love cats. And so to entertain myself while making this, my example has cats in it. Your thesis is your topic plus your position. And it also needs to take into account the size or scope of your paper. So is this a 2-page paper, a 10-page paper, a 20-page paper for your capstone? The size of the paper determines just how in-depth or complicated your thesis should be. So my topic is cats and dogs, and the guidelines tell me this is a 2 to 3-page paper. I can take the position that cats are better. And if that is my position, a very simple thesis is just cats are better than dogs. So this is topic plus position, and it does that great, right? It considers the prompt, it's declarative. You can argue it, which means someone could be saying in the chat, actually, no, dogs are better. You do not want to have a thesis that a regular, thoughtful person would never disagree on, because then it's not arguable and your paper is unnecessary. But what you do want is that your thesis is something you can do research to support. Cats are better than dogs. Does that well. Other things could be better. It is a very broad thesis, and it is also very vague. And so I would have a very hard time supporting this thesis in 2 pages because I'm saying that cats are always, in all circumstances, better than dogs. And that is a very big argument. So if I wanted to narrow this, I could use those reporter questions. So how? How are cats better than dogs? Why? For whom? Or when? Which cats are better than which dogs? And where are cats better than dogs? And answering any of these questions or any combination will help me narrow my thesis so that it's something I can support in smaller number of pages. Once you have your thesis, or you think you have your thesis set, it's time to do research. And so let's very briefly cover the purpose of academic research, researching through the library, web research, and Zotero, which some of you probably know I absolutely adore. And a key tip in terms of research is to make sure you are not researching for confirmation. The example I like to give is about whether or not the Earth is round or flat. If I was someone who thought that the Earth was flat, I could do research and find newspaper articles or websites that also say the Earth is flat. The Earth is not flat. But if I'm just looking for confirmation, I will miss all of the superior research disproving my thesis. And while that's a very obvious example, it can be easy to accidentally slip into looking for resources that prove the thesis you've written. And that's how you end up with blind spots. So my suggestion is to do what's called researching around the topic. If I've said that cats are better than dogs, one thing I'm going to want to research is why people think dogs are better than cats. Because then I know what the other arguments are, and I can try to brace against them or disprove them. So if you're researching through the library, one place to get started is OneSearch. This is essentially if you take all of the databases in Newman Library and you put them all together in one search space. So you can find a lot of information all in one place. You can find articles, books, and ebooks. And so it's a great place to start your research. The downside of using OneSearch is that because it is looking through so many materials, the things you're looking for can be buried. So it can be overwhelming. And if you are not familiar with what's called Boolean searching, this is a good place to use it. And I will make a note to send out to everyone here information about Boolean searches. This is a way that you can narrow your search terms. For example, using or not. So cats, but not dogs. And it wouldn't show me a resource that mentioned dogs, only the ones that only mentioned cats. Once you've gotten the general lay of the land through one search, I actually suggest drilling down into specific databases. The databases are all based on topic or field. So, for example, if you are a psychology student, there are several databases just dedicated to psychology. Same thing for business or medical fields. So, if you are in a course in your major, you can actually use those databases and know that everything you get in your search results will be relevant to your field. The other benefit to these databases is that the majority of them will only be looking for what's called peer-reviewed or academic sources. So if you see your professor saying that you need to include a peer-reviewed source, you're going to want to go to a database rather than necessarily going to Google or another search engine. And whichever of these options you use, I strongly advise annotating while you research. And so you're doing the same things that you saw me do with the assignment handout, where I'm noting things that I might want to, that should be cite with a C, or I'm noticing the ways that different research resources are interacting or are quote unquote in conversation. And I'm noting any questions or critiques I might have, because just because something is a formal article doesn't mean that they're always right. And you can and should look at them critically and sometimes disagree. Be careful with web research. Now, this is not me saying don't do it. This is just me saying do it mindfully. What do I mean by that? Well, ask yourself these questions. Who wrote it? When did they write it? Why did they write it? And how was it published? If you don't know the answer to one of these questions, look at that article or that resource a little bit more carefully. If you don't know the answer to multiple of these questions, I generally suggest avoiding the resource. The reason being, you can sometimes find yourself on a website that looks reputable and it's not. You can generally trust .gov. You can usually trust .edu, but anyone can buy .com, .net, um, all of those, and put whatever they'd like on it. And so the benefits of peer-reviewed research, which is where other experts in the field are vetting the article and saying, yes, we agree with this. You don't have that with web research by and large, and you have to do that. A good example of this is Wikipedia. I think that Wikipedia has a very useful role in research, and that's early on. Um, if you're not sure more about the topic, you don't know where to start with your research, if you scroll to the bottom of almost any page on Wikipedia, there's a works cited list that you can use to jumpstart your work. But you do not want to rely only on Wikipedia and you do not want to cite Wikipedia. You want to use it to springboard your research, not to be where you end up. And I'm just going to give a plug to Zotero. I feel like at this point I need to say I'm not affiliated with it because I just love it so much. Briefly, Zotero is a free tool that allows you to create essentially a database of your resources. So if you are a new student now, you would be able to upload your articles that you're reading. You could upload notes, you could tag it, you can create collections or you can tag things by subtopic. So if you are a business student and you are researching marketing for small independent businesses, you'd be able to tag things that way. And then whenever you hit your capstone course, you would be able to pull up all of the things you read with any annotations and any notes, and that can save you a whole lot of work. You can also use it to help you with your references list, which is another great piece of assistance that I wish I had had when I was working specifically on my dissertation. So I'm a huge fan. You can get it for free. The library sometimes offers trainings on it. And I highly suggest when you have a minute, just giving it a little bit of a look because it really might save you a lot of time later. All right, so getting to organization. You, at this point, you've made sure you understand your assignment. You've thought about your preliminary thesis. You've done some research around the topic. So you're essentially vetting your thesis through your research. And now it's time to think about actually writing that essay. And a key tip here is that sometimes you will find out that you need to start over. Because you are not researching to confirm your thesis, you will sometimes find out that your thesis is wrong. And if that's the case, or if you find that you just don't believe in it anymore, it's much better to adjust your thesis than it is to move forward. So I like to think of basic essay organization using the example of a tree. Idea being that your introduction is broad, like the leaves. The focus narrows in the body of your essay because it becomes narrower statements of support for your introduction and specifically your thesis. And then your conclusion really grounds the argument in terms of what should your reader do? Why should they care? So it's not just restating your thesis, it's showing the wider significance of everything you've hopefully convinced your reader about. So if we dive into this a little bit more deeply, the leaves as your introduction, the first line of your introduction, and even your title of your essay should be used as a hook to grab interest. So if you think about the way that some, not even necessarily essays, sometimes stories will open in the middle of things, or they'll open with something interesting, an interesting fact, or the title will be curious. All of those things hopefully make you want to know more. And that is, while not necessary, a good thing to think about for your essay. What is necessary is that your introduction provide the context your reader need to understand your general topic. So if I were talking specifically about cats and dogs, and cats being a better pet for people who are on in the Navy, let's just say. Well, most people aren't going to know what life is like in the Navy or on a ship. So I'm going to need to provide a little bit of context for the reader's understanding so that they understand my argument. After it's provided that context, it will state the thesis. And if you are looking for where to plug that in a shorter essay, people are generally trained to look for the thesis at the end of the introduction. So this goes away, this expectation goes away when your paper is long. If you have a 10-page paper or longer, you have a lot more fluidity there. But if you are writing something that is, let's say, under 5 pages, under 4 pages, your reader is probably expecting the thesis at the end of your introduction. And then you move on to the body. So it uses the thesis as a roadmap, and we'll see more of that in a moment. It presents the supporting evidence for the claims in your thesis, and it engages the research with quotations, summaries, and paraphrases. And after you have proven your point and you feel confident that any sensible reader will agree with you, that's when your conclusion offers solutions. So if you were convincing your reader of a problem through your essay, what should they do now? what are those next steps? And what is the significance? So if I'm arguing about cats and dogs, why should someone care about that? So let's give an example. Your introduction here would contain a thesis that connects everything that's going to follow. So what is the central point of your essay? Then I will summarize an article and compare and contrast the second article. And in conclusion, connect it to my own life, pointing back to the thesis, because here is my significance. So you can see it starts broad, it gets more narrow, and then it gets broad again. Now, let's talk a little bit about what might happen to your thesis while you're doing this, because remember, you might need to start over, but you might also just need to tweak it. So you might need to add nuance, and this could be through a qualifier. And so an example of this would be my original thesis was cats are better than dogs. I can add nuance by saying while both cats and dogs provide health benefits to their owners, right? So now I'm acknowledging that it's not that dogs are just terrible. I can go further than this though. I can say while both cats and dogs provide health benefits to their owners, cats are often the better choice of companion. So now I'm not even saying they're always the better choice of companion, just often. And I can make this an even stronger thesis by adding what's called an organizational statement. So an organizational statement tells your reader what to expect in your essay. If you remember, I said that your thesis could be a roadmap. This is how. And it does this by highlighting 2 or 3 main pieces of evidence in the order that they will appear in your essay. Your organizational statement can be part of the thesis statement, or it can be a second sentence, generally immediately after your thesis statement. What's this look like? Well, here's an example. While both cats and dogs provide health benefits to their owners, cats are often a better choice. That's my thesis, right? After the word because, this is an organizational statement. So my first piece of main evidence is that cats have a smaller carbon footprint. My second piece is that cats are less expensive. And my third piece is that cats adopt their owner's personality, which means they will generally fit in well with the rest of the household. This is a much stronger thesis than cats are better than dogs, right? It is much easier to poke a whole bunch of holes into that cats are better than dogs because I bet everyone here can think of an example of when it would be better to have a dog than a cat. But if I couch my argument in these very specific terms, one, it is easier for me to defend my essay and my thesis. But two, I have a roadmap of what I should be writing next because my reader is going to expect the first main point of my body to be that cats have a smaller carbon footprint, followed by cats being less expensive, and finally by cats adopting the owner's personality. So I know that is the order of my essay, and it's kind of like a really simple outline. So I highly suggest making an organizational statement and really doing this during the course of your research. Jot down the main points you are seeing the most support for, and or the main points that you are seeing the fewest points against, and think about those as potentially being one of the parts of your organization. And so I've mentioned outlining, and I know this is a little bit smaller, but this is just an example of how that might look. So, for example, here, let's say I have a working thesis, and then I have my working organizational statement. So just think about the one on the last page. When I am separating this out into my thesis, or excuse me, into my outline, all I have to do is take those parts of my organizational statement and make them my main points and then talk about the supporting detail. So you can see how having one of these can make writing the essay and making the outline much easier. So I am, again, huge proponent of giving it a shot. Now, let's talk about paragraphs, because if we're talking about essay organization, in a very real sense, your paragraphs are the main building block of your work. And so there are a couple of things to consider. And one thing I'm going to tell you to disregard for now, or at least don't focus on, is you may have heard in previous educational experiences, it could have been your previous college experience, it might have been back in high school, this idea that a paragraph has 3 to 7 sentences. And usually it does, but it's not just because those are magical numbers. So we're going to talk about what a paragraph is, the main point of your paragraph, which is also called the topic sentence, and flow. And in the course of this, we will cover why you shouldn't just be counting sentences to determine your paragraph. So, a paragraph conveys one idea, just one. I had a very hard time with this when I was an undergraduate. My essays frequently had 3 related ideas in them, but really they should just have one. And that idea is what is in your topic sentence. The rest of the paragraph is actually just to provide support for that single idea in your topic sentence. And then at the very end, it contains a concluding sentence. And this last sentence will either just kind of wrap up the thought that you're proving in your paragraph, or it will create the link to the next paragraph, and it might do both. So let's start with the evidence. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to build a paragraph with you. And in particular, I'm actually going to build a paragraph that I wrote in graduate school. So it's not going to be perfect, but it will be good enough that I do not want to close this webinar down rather than show it to you. So it could be worse. So types of evidence that you're going to want to include: primary and secondary sources. So primary sources are things like diaries, where someone is writing about something they have experienced in life, and autobiography, things of those natures, a journal. Secondary sources are people talking about primary sources or primary experiences. So most peer-reviewed resources are going to be secondary sources. What you are doing when you are writing your essay is creating a secondary source. They may contain quantitative data or qualitative data, so facts, figures, numbers. You will almost definitely have some combination of quotations, paraphrases, and summaries. Differences here: a summary is taking a larger body of work and condensing it down in your own words. A paragraph is taking someone else's words and making it in your own words without a major shift in the length of that thought. And a quotation is grabbing their words and replicating them, not making changes, putting them in quotation marks. You are also creating connections between the sources. So if you ever have a professor tell you that your sources are taking over your work, or I don't see enough of you in this paper, they are looking for you creating connections. And they're saying you're just providing me with the sources, but not the connections. The way I think about sources and evidence is that your sources are your background singers and you are the star. They are there to make you sound great. So at no point should your background vocals overtake you with your performance. And it's the same thing here. Your sources should not overtake you, the author, because your thoughts are the ones that your professors by and large are interested in. So here is an example of evidence from one of the paragraphs I wrote as a graduate student. I'm talking about a book. And so I'm saying, one, there's loss through the narrator's son's death and the end of his marriage. The narrator experiences a great fall from being a respected member of society to living alone in an unspecified location without any social connections. And there is death, if a metaphor. Okay, so these right now, it's just a list of ideas, right? What is the overarching point? Well, That is the topic sentence. It connects back to your thesis, and everything in your paragraph connects to it. So the way I think of a topic sentence is that it is like the link connecting your evidence to your thesis. It should be in your own words, unless the entire paragraph is parsing or pulling apart the quotation. So this should be your words, your argument. And if you want to check to make sure that your topic sentences are appropriate, this is how skimming plays in. So if you've ever heard of the method of skimming where you read the first and last sentence of every paragraph, that's because you are reading the topic sentence of the paragraph and the conclusion of the paragraph. And so you should be able to chart a piece of writing's main argument if you read the topic sentences and the paragraph concluding sentences. So what does that look like here? Well, my topic sentence in this case was this on the screen. The conclusion of the novel depicts many types of the love story's unhappy endings. And then I have those pieces of evidence, those examples, right? So now there is a unifying thought that is giving context to the things I'm providing as evidence. The conclusion depicts many types of the love story's unhappy endings, and here's three: the son's death and the end of the narrator's marriage, the great fall from being very well respected, and a metaphorical death. Unhappy endings. Something is still missing, and it is that concluding sentence. So, if I add on, all of this is the result of the narrator's failure to voluntarily accept who another character, Anna, really is. I now have one complete thought. I have a paragraph. This paragraph just happens to have 5 sentences. And this is why that 3 to 7 sentence rule usually worked okay. Often, if you have more than 7 sentences, you've moved into a second thought. And if you have fewer than 3 sentences, you aren't going in depth enough into your thought. But I don't want you to just count the sentences. I want you to think about the thought within the sentences and make sure you only have one and you have fully examined it and explored it. There's one more bit about paragraphs, and that's flow. And flow can be really hard to understand. I used to hate it when my professors told me I needed to work on flow because I was like, what even does that mean? Really, it means something reads well. What does that mean? Well, it's easy to follow the overall organization. It has logical paragraph structure. It has varied sentence structure. If we think about overall organization, that first point, this means that the ideas are ordered in a way where they connect to one another logically. So if you notice yourself needing to say, like I said earlier, right, where you're returning to a thought that you had pages ago, that's a sign that you actually should examine your organization because you are circling back to a topic rather than finishing it when you were first talking about it. It also provides context for how the ideas relate, and it might do this in part through linking words like however or furthermore. And it, again, orders your evidence carefully. So there are a couple of ways this might work, and one that I found most frequently is on the screen. This idea of your most obvious point first, so that you can finish strong with your strongest point last. But there are other ways that you can organize your evidence or your essay. So if you're thinking back to the organizational statement, in this case, I think my idea of cats adopting their owner's personality is my strongest point. So I'm saving it for the end. You might have what's called a rebuttal paragraph, which is where you are looking at one of the other opposing arguments' views and proving why they are mistaken. You might decide that that goes first, and then you move. The idea, though, is that however you have decided to organize your points, you're doing this mindfully. Looking at the level of the paragraph, so paragraph level flow, again, those topic sentences, crucial. Then following it with that supporting evidence and arranging the sentence so that the ideas connect to one another. So again, often through those linking words, but also through making sure that you are providing information in the order that your reader needs it to follow your argument. And generally speaking, you want to avoid ending your paragraph with a quotation, just like you don't want to begin your paragraph with a quotation, because remember that last sentence is all about really concluding the idea, wrapping it up, and potentially connecting it to the one that comes next. At the sentence level, you want to make sure you vary your sentence structure and you use quote unquote sentence clauses to your advantage. Now, I'm not going to have time during this webinar to go into what sentence clauses is or are, excuse me. But if you've never heard of a sentence clause before and you sometimes aren't quite sure about your grammar, I highly recommend looking at clauses because these are the building blocks of sentences. And once you understand the clauses, and there's only two types, dependent and independent, once you understand how those connect, you know how to punctuate almost any sentence. So, highly recommend sentence clauses. Using those transition words and phrases and double checking the order of your sentences, both of those moves are very important as well. So, here's an example of me doing that, right? So, starting in the beginning with in contrast, this is underscoring the relationship between this paragraph and the one that came before. And then I've created a list with these three pieces of evidence. And the words here, there is also exile. This connects to the previous sentence, saying essentially point two. And lastly, says this is the third and final point. And so if we look at this paragraph, this is a quote unquote finished paragraph. You can see I now have integrated all of these points that I've talked about. So if I read it, and I'll read it one last time. In contrast, the conclusion depicts many types of the love story's unhappy endings. There is loss through his son's death and the end of his marriage. There is also exile, a great fall from being a respected member of society to living alone in an unspecified location without any social connections. Lastly, there is death, if a metaphorical one. All of this is the result of the narrator's failure to voluntarily accept who Anna really is. And there's my paragraph. So I do not expect, and I would not recommend for you to go through each of these stages in your mind when you are writing a first draft. But when you are revising, when you are editing, check your work for these qualities because you can see how this is much stronger of a paragraph than what I started out with, which were just these middle three sentences. Speaking of drafting, just want to make sure everyone knows about this one model because it really underscores the fact that no one writes a perfect first draft. This is a model first introduced to me by Anne Lamott, who has a wonderful article about writing and the fact that even published authors often hate their first drafts. And so the way she talks about drafts is she says you have three types. The first is the down draft, where you just get it down. You don't worry about your reader. You don't worry about what you're writing being any good whatsoever. You make notes about things to fix later, but you don't worry about fixing them just now. And you can see this is often sometimes called a writerly draft because it's all about you as the writer. It is there to help you get your ideas down so that you can fix them up at a later point. And so try to follow an outline if you wrote one, but don't stress about it. Writing can be stressful enough, particularly if you're being evaluated on it. So remember that your outline is there as a tool for you. It is not there to imprison you in a structure. If you find during the course of writing this draft that you have left your outline behind, note that, but give yourself the chance to see if maybe you've stumbled upon a better organization. After you've done your down draft, next is the up draft where you fix it up. So this is revision and editing. Revision is big scale. So my ideas are wrong. I've forgotten this point, all of those things. Editing is saying, this paragraph seems a little bit weird. Let me see if I can't figure out how to fix it a little. What's missing in this one paragraph? Think about your readers here. So you have that writerly draft where everything was about you. Now it's about your reader. Make sure that you are not assuming knowledge they won't have, which is why knowing your audience is important. Make sure that you are succeeding with the purpose you set out with in your essay. And think about what they would find most convincing. Make sure you hit those points. Again, you're checking the organization when you're revising. So you're looking at your outline and you're looking at your essay and you're saying, okay, here's how they match. What you might find helpful, I know I used to find this helpful, was actually writing an outline based on my topic sentences and seeing what the organization looks like from the bird's eye view. And you're checking your accuracy here. So make sure your facts and figures are correct. This is a good place to start making sure that you're citing your sources, although really a lot of that happens in the next draft as well. Make sure that you aren't misreading an important point from your research. And look for those holes. So look for areas where actually there's a major or an important point that you have not addressed, or a counter argument that you have not disproven or defended against. And so last, the third type of draft is the dental draft. This is where you are checking every tooth. You are proofreading, and this is where you're thinking about sentence structure, looking for commas, that kind of thing. You're checking for your grammar, your citations. So again, that making sure you're not accidentally plagiarizing something or academic integrity violations. So for example, you want to make sure that you have in-text citations, not just for quotations, but also paraphrases and summaries. If you realize you don't, this is where you want to make sure you find that. So in short, you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's here. An important point is that while there are three types of drafts, and you want to eventually move from the down draft to the updraft to the dental draft, you might find yourself moving between one and the other. So you might have a down draft where you're writing for yourself, start to fix it up, realize there's a whole point you missed, and go back to writing a down draft. The important thing to remember is you want your final draft before you submit your work to be the one on the screen. You want it to be a dental draft because you want to make sure it's clean and as good as you can make it before you submit it. So I'm going to hit some other tips and then I will check the QA. But in particular, I want to talk about navigating longer papers because I know that these can be very stressful. I also want to just very quickly talk about when to cite and APA resources and give you some final suggestions before looking in that QA. So, longer papers. The first bit is why is the paper so long? I promise you, as someone who used to teach these courses, it's not just because we want to torture you. It is actually because we are signaling to you the scope and reach of your thesis. So again, longer paper means more in-depth, more complicated thesis. And that's why you will often find those papers getting longer as you progress towards your degree. It's because when you start, you're doing something that's more general. And as you move toward your capstone or your thesis, you are really delving in with all of the knowledge you've gained in your previous courses. So your paper has to be more complicated, your argument has to be more complicated, and therefore it has to be larger or longer. And so depth of the argument is something that is also increasing as your paper increases in length. And again, complexity. All of this means more research. And so, not to plug Zotero again, but this is why I love Zotero so much. Because Zotero allows you to build off of research you've already done rather than just doing more in this one course. And so, my big tip for you is if you are faced with a long paper, Make each part of your long paper's organizational statement into a shorter paper. And I'll show you what this looks like. Let's say I have to write a 10-page paper on cats versus dogs. Well, I have that first part of my organizational statement, and it becomes a thesis. Cats are often a better choice because they have a smaller carbon footprint. Then I have my second part of my organizational statement. It also becomes a thesis. Cats are often a better choice because they are less expensive. And you will not be at all surprised to know that the last part of my organizational statement has become a thesis. Cats are often a better choice because they adopt their owner's personality. So I now have 3 thesis statements. And so I write 3 short papers. I have an introduction of, let's say, a page, and a conclusion of maybe a page and a half. And then I have 2.5 pages on my paper about cats having a smaller footprint, carbon footprint, and that making them better. And another 2.5 on how cats are a better bet because they are less expensive. And one more 2.5-page paper on how cats are a better bet because they adopt their owner's personality. And if you add this all together, you have a paper that's 9 to 10 pages long. And so when you do this, you've got a 10-page paper, but your experience of writing this paper was never more than writing a 3-page paper. And this is the way that I wrote all of my long papers in school, because this was the way I stopped myself from freaking out about the length. So remember, you have 3 main points. You can organize your essay this way, and it can hopefully take some of that pressure off of you. If we also think about citing, because I know this also causes a lot of stress, the idea is make sure you are citing any information that is not common knowledge. If you don't think that a generally informed member of the population will know something, consider citing that source. If you didn't know it before you entered this particular course, consider citing that source. Whenever you quote a source, you have to cite it. You also have to use the quotation marks. Whenever you paraphrase a source, you have to cite it. And I know I've said that already, but this is something that really throws people off because folks think, well, this is my words. Why do I have to cite it? You are citing the idea. You are saying, this is where I found the idea. And even though this is in my own words, the idea was originally over there. And no surprise, whenever you summarize a source for the exact same reason. What I do want to highlight here, though we will not go into it in this webinar, is the idea of improperly paraphrasing. And so that's when something is not fully in your own words. So for example, if you are just sort of replacing words from the original sentence with equivalent words, but the sentence structure is still the same, that is an improper paraphrase. And so you want to make sure that you are truly reorganizing the sentence, truly transforming it in your own words. Another piece of just general guidance about when do you quote rather than paraphrase or summarize. Idea is quote something when you could not possibly hope to say it any better, or the words are specifically important. So if I were writing a paper on Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, I might quote his speech because I wanted to do a close reading of it. Or I might quote part of the speech because he sums up his idea so perfectly that I can't hope to come close or do good enough with it. What this means, though, is that you often are going to be able to paraphrase rather than quote. If you are in doubt about how many quotations to use for your paper, that's a good thing to ask your professor about. But I often found myself looking at papers where there were 2 or 3 or more quotations in a single paragraph, and that's often a sign that you could probably paraphrase some. I just want to put these on the screen for a moment because there are different resources for APA formatting. You have, starting from the bottom, online reference formatters, and these are the ones where you put in the information about your source and it spits out a citation that's formatted for you. The important thing to remember with these is that if you put, we say garbage in, garbage out. So if there's an error in what you give to the formatter, your citation will also have an error. And as a result of that, it's good to know generally what their citations should look like. And so there are two online writing labs. That's what OWL stands for. There's the Excelsior one and the Purdue one. Both of these cover the same material. So it's really about which one of the two jives best with the way you think, because they're formatted differently. So I would say look at both and see the one you like the most and go with that one. You can't choose the wrong one there. And you already know that I love Zotero. I've spoken about that enough. So here are my final suggestions. First, start the process early. Right? You can see I had 4 stages before I even started writing my paper in this process. And all of those stages helped me come to an organization that worked well and made my drafting process easier. So I know it can be hard, particularly students at SPS. You all have a bunch of other things that are vying for your time and attention, but in a very strange way, starting the process early will help you become less stressed and may actually save you time in the long run. Remember that nothing you write is set in stone until you submit it. So don't feel like you have to write this golden perfect sentence the first time. In Anne Lamott's essay, where she's going over those different types of drafts, she talks about how she would literally prefer to be hit by a bus than have someone see her first draft. And she made a living on writing. So if she can be comfortable, hopefully, changing what she writes, hopefully you can get there too. And to help you get there, start playing with new tools and methods. So I started out writing traditional outlines and eventually found that I did much better putting each idea on an index card and moving my index cards around. So you can play with different things that might work better for you. Because remember, your writing process is there to serve you, not the other way around. Think about when you work best as well. So when I was getting my PhD and writing my dissertation, I found that I wrote well in the morning and I revised well in the evening. And so that was how I organized my time, writing in the morning, revising in the evening, sometimes revising on the train on my way home from work. You can think about what types of environments or tools you need for the different parts of the writing process and organize yourself that way. And then you may have heard of this before, but with proofreading, what often gets in our way is that we know what we meant to say. And so even if that's not what we actually said, sometimes we'll see what we meant to say. And reading out loud will force you to slow down. Reading backwards, so in this case, I don't mean reading the sentence backwards. I mean starting from the last sentence and then the penultimate sentence all the way up. Doing this forces you to slow down and it will help you see those sentence fragments and comma splices and all of the other little grammatical things you might need to catch. So this is a big tip, and I actually will read out loud when I'm revising at this point. The backwards thing, that's proofreading only. And lastly, but not least, please ask for help when you need it. It can be very easy in an online course to feel very alone and like you need to write and finish your essay by yourself. That is not the case. That is part of what your professor is there for, is to think through things with you, bounce ideas off of. You have the writing fellows who are also there to do the same. And there's tutor.com in case you want to work on your writing with someone at 2 in the morning. Tutor.com is still there. So ask for help literally when you need it. But of course, when you want to speak with your professor, remember asynchronous. So I do not advise waiting until the last minute there. All right, it is Q&A time. I see we have a couple of questions. And so the first one I see, well, actually, I'll start with the last one. Someone is asking about a copy of the presentation. I will indeed be providing a copy of this presentation to you. So you will get that. You will also have the recording. So if you prefer to listen to me, you can do so. And if you just want to look at the slides, you can do that too. Someone has asked for a sample, and I'm not clear on what the sample is about. So if that person could clarify what sample they wanted, if I can't show it now, I can work to include one with the slides. Um, I see someone said that they joined the session about how to use Zotero, but forgot how to use Zotero. That is okay, because number one, there will be more sessions on Zotero, but number two, Zotero is used so widely that you can actually just look for it on YouTube and get a whole bunch of FAQs and guides on it that way too. So I would definitely suggest those. And if that's not working well for you, you can email me at the email address on the screen, and I can also try to assist as well. Um, and then all of the other questions are requesting examples of a search. So we've got 3 minutes. I am going to quickly pull up a browser and we can go and do a search. All right, so our home library is the Newman Library. And if I can see in the chat, can you see the Newman Library page? Or are you still seeing the slides? I'm not seeing anyone saying they're still seeing slides. Oh, just the slides. Okay, new share. Let's fix that. Thank you, everybody. All right. So hopefully now you can see. Great. Perfect. All right. So welcome to the Newman Library homepage. This define your search right here. This is one search. So I can say I want articles, and then I'm going to look for love story, and narrator. I'm going to get a whole bunch of resources. So Newman Library's one search, and this is the same on any library homepage, is now looking at all of the resources it has at its disposal. And it is pulling up everything that says love story and narrator. So you can see narrator, story, but it's not necessarily doing these things in order. So just very quickly, you can do an advanced search here. And this will allow you to narrow it down some. You can add new lines, and you can see this is the and. You click this or not. These are Boolean searches. So I can say I want love story, and I want those two things together, and I want narrator, but I do not want romance. And if I search, it will now look for anything that contains the phrase or the term love story in any language. It will also look for narrator, but it will say nothing about romance. And I've got 227 results instead of 1,863 results. So that's one search. You can see these, you can see it's peer reviewed, you can see if it's available online. If I click this, it will take me to it. If it can, you'll have to log in. But that's one search. Now, the other option here is you can look for a specific journal, and you can look here by category. But you can also go and look for the individual databases. And so you would be able to search just like I did here, but looking specifically for those databases only. And you can actually add some favorites, both for sources and the rest, to help you move forward. So I know I'm moving a bit quickly because we are out of time. But I hope that that shows a sample at least of one search so that you can see how you would use that. And for the person who just asked, where do you find a peer-reviewed article and a journalistic article? This is where. So you can find it here or through those databases. Um, Last point before we end, the question of what citation style to use to cite your sources. When in doubt, ask your professor. Most of the different majors here use APA style, but not all of them. Some use Chicago, and I think one uses MLA. So if you are not sure, definitely ask. If you are in a gen ed course, almost all of them will be asking you to use APA just because that is the most common one here. So that is it for us today, or this evening. I want to say thank you again for all of your time and attention, for joining us on this midweek. Well, I guess it's early in the week, but feels midweek evening. I really appreciate your time and I hope it was useful. If you have any questions about any of this, please do reach out to us at firstyear@sps.cuny.edu. We would be glad to assist. So please have a great rest of your evening. Take care and good luck with your essays. Have a good night.